At 2:17 a.m. UTC, nothing explodes. No sirens wail across cities. No missiles streak through the sky. No armies cross borders. Instead, something far more catastrophic happens. 20,000 kilometers above Earth, in the silent vacuum of medium orbit, navigation satellites simply stop responding. Timing signals degrade to useless noise. Data relays drop their packets into the void. One by one, systems on the ground begin to lose a reference they never knew they depended on. The sky goes quiet. We think civilization collapses through war, through bombs, through invasion. We're wrong. Civilization collapses when the ledger stops balancing. When the invisible infrastructure that synchronizes every transaction, every movement, every digital handshake suddenly vanishes. This isn't a story about satellites. It's a story about the most fragile balance sheet ever constructed. One where humanity bet everything on signals we cannot see. For 3 decades, satellites have been the silent creditors of modern life, invisible, dependable, assumed. They orbit in the dark, synchronizing clocks to the nanosecond, guiding container ships worth billions, routing internet traffic that moves trillions in capital daily. They tell everything from your smartphone to the power grid exactly where it is and exactly when it is. Most people think satellites are just GPS or internet from space. That's the surface. The truth runs deeper and darker. They provide the universal time stamp that makes digital trust possible. Without them, the global economy doesn't just slow. It fragments into isolated markets that cannot agree on basic reality. This is the infrastructure nobody sees until it dies. And when it dies, the bill comes due immediately. The world at peak satellite dependence looks magnificent. Every city gleams with connectivity. Financial markets operate at the speed of light, executing millions of trades per second across continents. Autonomous vehicles navigate streets with centimeter precision. Container ports operate like choreographed machines, moving goods with efficiency that would have seemed magical a generation ago. Airlines route 50,000 flights daily through invisible corridors in the sky, trusting signals from satellites to guide every descent. The supply chain is a miracle of coordination. Factories in Shenzhen know exactly when trucks will arrive in Rotterdam. It's profitable. And beneath the surface, the foundation is rotting. Here's the trap, the addiction, the fatal flaw in the balance sheet. Modern civilization borrowed against certainty and never built reserves. Every system was optimized for efficiency, which is just another word for fragility. When you run just-in-time logistics, you're operating with zero inventory, zero buffer, zero redundancy. You're leveraging certainty itself. And certainty in the modern world flows from one source. Those silent satellites providing timing signals accurate to billionths of a second. Think about what that means. The entire global financial system uses GPS timing to timestamp transactions. Not because it's convenient, because it's the only system trusted by all parties. Banks in Tokyo, London, and New York need to agree on the exact sequence of trades. Which order came first matters when billions are at stake. Without satellite timing, that agreement dissolves. Markets freeze, not because money disappeared, because trust did. The power grid is worse. Operators use phase measurement units that rely on GPS timing to synchronize electricity across thousands of miles. When alternating current flows through transmission lines, the phase must match perfectly, or the grid tears itself apart. Those phase measurement units check timing against satellites 50 times per second. If that signal degrades even slightly, the sensors report impossible data. Automated safety systems, seeing readings they cannot explain, begin tripping breakers to protect equipment. The grid doesn't go dark all at once. It goes blind. Control rooms lose their wide area view. They can no longer see power surges building across the network. They're flying blind at 70,000 megawatts. One mistake cascades into regional blackouts. And it all starts with a timing signal 20,000 kilometers overhead going silent. The antagonist in this story isn't a nation, it's physics. GPS signals reach Earth incredibly weak. By the time they arrive, they're less powerful than a light bulb viewed from 1,500 miles away. That makes them trivially easy to jam, spoof, or degrade. You don't need sophisticated weapons. They blast high-power interference into the sky, drowning out those whisper-quiet satellite signals. The satellites keep broadcasting. The signals just never reach the ground intact. On paper, GPS satellites are hardened. In reality, they're defenseless against ground-based jamming. They were designed in an era when space was considered neutral territory. That era ended. In orbit, the threat evolves differently. Stalker satellites drift close to navigation nodes. Not Russian or Chinese satellites on obvious intercept courses. Commercial satellites that suddenly maneuver during routine operations. Satellites that deploy robotic arms for debris removal that could just as easily snap antennas. Satellites carrying sensors that could be repurposed as directed energy weapons. These are soft kill weapons. They disable targets without creating debris. That distinction matters because debris means the Kessler syndrome. One collision creates shrapnel. Shrapnel hits another satellite. More shrapnel. The cascade becomes exponential. Low Earth orbit fills with fragments moving at 17,000 miles per hour. Every future launch risks collision. The space economy dies. GPS satellites orbit higher in medium Earth orbit. If they're destroyed, the debris stays there. But if war triggers a Kessler cascade in the lower orbits, we lose the ability to launch replacements. We become trapped on Earth, unable to repair what we lost. Space blockade. Permanent. GPS accuracy slips from meters to hundreds of meters. Planes still fly. Ships still sail. But automation disengages. Confidence disappears. Air traffic controllers notice inconsistencies in flight management systems. Aircraft revert to older navigation modes. Delays ripple outward. Not because planes cannot fly, because certainty is gone. At sea, container ships lose the centimeter-level precision needed to dock in modern ports. Automated cranes freeze, unable to locate containers. Ships wait offshore. Containers pile up. Perishable goods begin to spoil. This is where navigation failure transforms into economic failure. Every delayed shipment disrupts supply chains optimized for speed, not resilience. Warehouses run lean. Stores restock daily. A few days of disruption is manageable. A few weeks changes everything. Timing failures hit next. Financial markets use satellite timing to time-stop trades with microsecond precision. When satellites fail, clocks drift. Milliseconds matter. Microseconds matter. Trading systems detect timing inconsistencies and refuse to execute. Orders queue. Liquidity evaporates. Within hours, major exchanges pause trading rather than risk errors. Payment processors fail closed. Credit card networks reject valid transactions because timestamps don't match. ATMs run dry as banks throttle withdrawals. Cash becomes valuable again, not because money disappeared, because the digital ledger that tracks money lost synchronization. Every transaction requires trust. Trust requires proof of sequence. Sequence requires synchronized clocks. The satellites provided those clocks. Now they're gone. Cellular networks degrade simultaneously. Base stations rely on GPS timing to coordinate handoffs as phones move between towers. Without synchronization, interference rises. Data rates collapse. Text messages delay for minutes, then hours. Phone calls drop mid-sentence. Entire neighborhoods lose service intermittently, then permanently. By day 2, 50 million people in urban centers have no mobile connectivity. Emergency services feel the strain immediately. Ambulances depend on GPS routing to shave minutes off response times. Fire crews rely on live mapping. Police dispatch systems use satellite data to allocate units. When positioning becomes uncertain, response slows, not by hours, by the minutes that decide whether someone lives or dies. The death toll from satellite failure isn't measured in explosions. It's measured in ambulances that arrived too late. The internet fractures differently. Data cables still function. Fiber optic lines still carry light. But data alone isn't enough. It must arrive in the right order at the right time with the right verification. Global internet services rely on data centers synchronized across continents. When timing drifts, databases split. Conflicts multiply. Systems designed to heal themselves begin rejecting their own replicas. The result feels uncanny. Some apps work, others don't. Websites load partially. Banking apps time out. Cloud storage becomes unreachable. Encryption protocols fail because secure communications require timestamps to prevent replay attacks. As clocks diverge, secure channels cannot establish. Systems choose between security and availability. Most choose security, shutting down rather than exposing themselves to fraud. The internet doesn't go dark everywhere. It goes dark unevenly. An uneven failure is harder to understand, harder to fix, harder to trust. By day 3, the economic bleeding accelerates. Global shipping has ground to near standstill. Ports operate at 30% capacity, manually coordinating what was once automatic. Container ships burn fuel, waiting offshore because harbor master systems cannot calculate safe approach vectors. Insurance companies declare force majeure on shipping contracts. Premiums quintuple overnight for routes still operating. Airlines cancel 40% of flights, not because aircraft are damaged, because navigation uncertainty makes instrument landings impossible at most airports. Passenger jets cannot land safely in reduced visibility without satellite augmentation systems. Pilots revert to visual approaches, which means only airports with perfect weather operate normally. Business travel ceases. Tourism collapses. The economic multiplier spirals downward. Supply chains rupture completely. Automotive plants shut down within days as just-in-time parts delivery fails. Electronics manufacturers in Asia cannot ship to assemblers in America. Pharmaceutical supply chains fragment as temperature-controlled logistics lose tracking capability. Supermarkets began rationing staples, not because food production stopped, because distribution networks cannot function without navigation and timing infrastructure. Trucks still drive, but dispatching becomes manual, inefficient, and prone to error. A system that moved billions of dollars in goods daily now struggles to move millions. The velocity of money collapses. GDP contracts at rates not seen since the Great Depression. This is the smoking gun moment, the instant when economists realized modern prosperity wasn't built on innovation or productivity. It was built on synchronized certainty. Certainty provided by satellites that nobody thought to protect. Governments scramble. Military commands activate continuity protocols. Strategic facilities switch to backup atomic clocks. But atomic clocks cost hundreds of thousands of dollars each. Only critical infrastructure has them. The rest of the economy makes do with crystal oscillators that drift by milliseconds per day. That's catastrophic for systems requiring nanosecond precision. Telecom companies prioritize emergency services, rationing bandwidth. Cloud providers isolate regions to prevent cascading data corruption. It helps, slightly. But there aren't enough engineers to manually coordinate what satellites did automatically. The human capital doesn't exist. An entire generation grew up trusting the sky. They never learned the terrestrial backups. Paper maps are scarce. Radio beacons are unmaintained. Local knowledge was traded for algorithmic efficiency. Now efficiency is gone, and the knowledge isn't coming back quickly. By day 7, the social consequences become visible. Urban areas experience rolling blackouts as grid operators struggle without synchronized timing. Traffic accidents increase 30% as signal coordination fails. Emergency rooms overflow. Hospitals running on backup power triage care. Pharmacies cannot verify prescriptions through degraded networks. The death rate climbs, not dramatically, just steadily. 5% higher than baseline. 10%. 15%. It's invisible to individuals but obvious in aggregate data. Governments suppress the numbers. Admitting the scale of vulnerability invites panic and adversarial escalation. Official statements blame software glitches and solar weather. The public suspects but cannot confirm. Uncertainty breeds conspiracy theories. Social trust erodes faster than infrastructure. Financial markets remain frozen. Stock exchanges attempt limited reopening with manual oversight, but volume is negligible. Nobody trusts price discovery without synchronized timestamps. Currency markets seize completely. Foreign exchange trading requires sub-millisecond coordination across time zones. Without satellite timing, exchange rates cannot be reliably quoted. International trade reverts to barter and bilateral agreements. Letters of credit become worthless without verification infrastructure. The global economy, which grew to $90 trillion on the assumption of frictionless information flow, suddenly faces friction costs not seen since the 19th century. Every transaction requires negotiation. Every contract requires physical verification. The velocity of capital approaches zero. This is the climax, the moment of default. Not a nation defaulting on bombs. Civilization itself defaulting on the promise of modernity. Sovereignty is solvency. That phrase echoes through classified briefings. Nations with indigenous positioning systems fare slightly better. China's Beidou constellation was designed for independence. Russia's GLONASS provides backup coverage. Europe's Galileo offers redundancy. But America, the architect of GPS, never built true alternatives. The assumption was always that GPS would be available. That assumption was the debt. And the debt just came due. The geopolitical consequences unfold rapidly. Nations without space infrastructure lose negotiating power overnight. Their economies cannot function. Their militaries cannot coordinate. They become dependencies, not partners. The global order reshuffles around access to satellite timing. Space was supposed to be the province of all mankind. Instead, it becomes the ultimate choke point, the high ground that decides which nations remain sovereign and which become economic protectorates. Recovery begins slowly. Emergency launches place replacement satellites in orbit within weeks. But weeks is an eternity when the economy bleeds billions daily. And the new satellites are hardened, which means expensive. Constellations that cost $3 billion to deploy now cost $20 billion with anti-jamming technology, armored components, and maneuver capability. Insurance for space assets increases by orders of magnitude. Launch providers cannot meet demand. The backlog stretches to years. Some systems never fully recover. Companies that depended on just-in-time logistics restructure around inventory buffers. That's less efficient but more resilient. Supply chains shorten as firms prioritize reliability over cost. Globalization reverses partially as nations prioritize domestic production of critical goods. The economic model that dominated from 1990 to 2025 dies in a week. It's replaced by something older, something less optimal but survivable. The generational aftermath is measured in decades. The first full restoration of GPS constellation capability takes until 2029. 4 years of degraded global navigation. But the economic scars last longer. Entire industries restructured around distrust of space-based infrastructure. Terrestrial timing networks see massive investment. Countries build redundant radio beacon systems. Fiber optic cables carry time signals as backup to satellite links. The cost runs into hundreds of billions globally. That's capital diverted from growth, from innovation, from expansion. It's insurance against a failure that already happened. The generation that lived through the blackout never fully trusts the sky again. They keep paper maps. They memorize routes. They maintain cash reserves. Call it trauma or call it wisdom. Either way, behavior changes permanently. The final lesson is brutal in its simplicity. Modern civilization built a balance sheet with one critical assumption, that the infrastructure providing certainty would always be available, that satellites would keep broadcasting, that timing would stay synchronized, that navigation would remain precise. We leveraged that assumption to the maximum. We eliminated redundancy to maximize profit. We optimized efficiency until fragility became systemic. And when the assumption broke, the leverage killed us. Not literally, not everyone, but it killed the version of civilization that existed before, the one that moved fast and broke things, the one that assumed tomorrow would look like today. That civilization died at 2:17 UTC when the satellites went dark. Think about the scale of that. An entire economic order built over 30 years erased in a week, not by nuclear weapons, not by climate catastrophe, not by pandemic, by the loss of a timing signal, by the absence of synchronized clocks. The accountants saw it coming. The risk assessments flagged single points of failure. The insurance actuaries calculated the exposure. But nobody listened because the system was profitable. Profit deferred risk until risk came due all at once. That's the pattern. That's the lesson. Sovereignty is solvency. Solvency requires infrastructure. Infrastructure requires redundancy. And redundancy costs money that competes with quarterly earnings. So redundancy gets cut until failure, until collapse, until the ledger balances in blood. Here's what they don't teach in economics classes. The most advanced systems are the most delicate. Complexity is fragile. Optimization is brittle. Every efficiency gain trades resilience for profit. Every just-in-time system is one disruption from just too late. The satellites made the world efficient. They synchronized global commerce. They enabled trillion-dollar markets in nanosecond arbitrage. But they also created the mother of all single points of failure. A vulnerability so fundamental that its exploitation didn't require war. It required one attack, one sustained jamming campaign, 1 week of darkness overhead. That's all it took to prove that modern prosperity was borrowed against infrastructure we couldn't defend.